So I'd just like to begin by thanking everyone for coming here today. Speaking for us, thank you to the commission members for taking time to listen to the public comments that we have today. I have some great news. We filled up every single slot, so we do have around 20 people speaking today to give us their public comments. Outside of that, I would like to introduce Secretary Sanders to give our opening remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you all for being here today and for participating in this Andrea Harris Task Force listening session. Last week, we held our first session, and that task force meeting was focused on the 4 other subtopics of the task force. We have 5 subcommittees. Those 5 subcommittees are access to healthcare for underserved communities, enhance patient engagement in healthcare settings, economic opportunities in business development and employment, create economic and educational opportunities for communities of color in the following areas: health literacy, general academia, and financial literacy. So last week, our listening session was focused on those 4 topics. And today we're focused on our 5th subcommittee, which is environmental justice and inclusion. We heard feedback that has been communicated to the subcommittees, and we will continue to seek input from the members of the public, subject matter experts, and stakeholders as the task force works to impact policy and programs for all of those residents across North Carolina, and specifically for those people of color who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. The reason that this task force was established by Governor Cooper and the mission is for the task force to create economic stability, eliminate health disparities, and achieve environmental justice in North Carolina by convening testimonies and questioning the status quo, identifying best practices, reporting that information to the Office of the Governor, and importantly, we also want to move forward with policy shaping and policy making ideas that we hopefully can get implemented. Today's listening session, again, is focused on environmental justice and inclusion. We have members of our subcommittee here and the chair of the subcommittee, and look forward to all of your comments. So I turn it back over to Catherine at this time.
All right, thank you very much, Secretary Sanders. And next, I would like to introduce our subcommittee chair for the Environmental Justice and Inclusion Subcommittee, as well as the Secretary for the Department of Environmental Quality. The Secretary Regan, are you on the call?
I am.
All right.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you, Secretary Sanders, for your steadfast leadership. We greatly appreciate your leadership of this task force. And thanks to your team for setting up this session. It's important. It's an important opportunity for the Environmental Justice and Inclusion Subcommittee to hear directly from the public this evening. I'm joined by my fellow subcommittee members, Dr. James H. Johnson, Jr. He's the chair of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality's Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board, and a William R. Keenan, Jr., Distinguished Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship and Director of the Urban Investment Strategy Center. Also joined by Mr. Greg Richardson, Executive Director of the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs, our EJ and Inclusion Liaison, Carolina Fonseca Jimenez, and Destiny James, the EJ and Inclusion Intern. So we're grateful to have all of these resources tonight. It didn't take our subcommittee long to agree that the decisions that we are making concerning protecting our environment and natural resources are directly connected to our economy and to our community's health. We also recognize the need to root out biased criteria in our zoning laws and housing policies, such that our decisions don't further expose vulnerable communities to significantly more pollution and exacerbate other social inequities, especially during times like this crisis that we're experiencing. The bottom line is environmental justice is an economic, health, and infrastructure issue, which serves as the basis for the draft short and long-term goals aimed at improving how our state's programs impact our communities. The first short-term goal is providing dedicated environmental justice and equity and inclusion resources to our key state agencies. This will help the state take more of a comprehensive approach to considering environmental justice and equity as we make decisions affecting our environment, natural resources, and our communities. The second short-term goal is to develop a framework to inventory the environmental impacts in aging, public buildings, and housing, and consider how remediation work might be used to create jobs in both of those areas. And in the long term, the subcommittee has a goal to evaluate needed changes to state law that would better address environmental justice, equity, and inclusion concerns, and develop a successful legislative strategy to put all of these changes in motion. We each understand that environmental justice is also an economic, health, and infrastructure issue, and believe that these short and long-term goals reflect those concerns. So tonight, we are here to listen. Your voices are very important to the work, and we look forward to receiving everyone's input this evening. Thank you. Back to you, Catherine.
Fantastic. Thank you, Secretary Regan. All right, so moving on from there, I'm going to go ahead and start our public comment period. Let me just go ahead and start just giving everyone who's on the call right now directions. I am going to call on everyone in the order of which you signed up, which I have in front of me right now, to speak. You will unmute yourselves. If you have a camera, you may turn your camera on as well. You have 2 minutes to speak. I will start a timer, so I'll let you know when you can start. And when we reach the end of those 2 minute time, I will just let you know that your time is up and we will move on. If you're unable to finish your full 2 minutes in between the time that we give you to give your full comment at the end of this meeting, I will send out an email to everyone who did sign up with the link on the Andrea Harris Task Force website to give public comments via that website as well, so that we may also give those should you be unable to finish your comment. With that being said, we'll go ahead and start with our first commenter for the night, and that is Ms. Chandra Taylor. Let me start the timer real quick, and you may begin.
Thank you all for the opportunity to provide comments to you today. My name is Chandra Taylor. I'm a senior attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center. Today, SELC requests that this task force makes recommendations for North Carolina law, regulations, and guidance to be clarified to provide clear authority for our state environmental permitting agency to consider cumulative impacts of permitting decisions and to not make permitting decisions that will result in a disparate adverse impact on communities of color. Any entity that receives federal funding, including our state DEQ, has a responsibility to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It prohibits discrimination in the use of federal funding and allows the federal agency who provided that funding to take it away if it finds that the federal aid recipient discriminated in the use of that funding. So North Carolina already has the authority to make sure that there's no discrimination in the use of the federal funding, including in permitting. However, in order to clarify that authority, we request that this task force make recommendations in support of legislation that follows the precedent created by North Carolina General Statute Section 130A-294A4C9. That statute is in solid waste permitting and prohibits citing a solid waste facility if that facility, if the impacts of that facility coupled with impacts of similar facilities will result in a disparate adverse impact on communities protected by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There are several different environmental permitting statutes that could be modified similarly to follow the provisions similar to the Solid Waste Management Act of 2007 provision that I stated just now, including NCGSA, North Carolina General Statute 143-215.1, which is in the control of sources of water pollution. That statute could be modified. NCGS 143-215.108, that is the control of sources of air pollution. That
the interruption, Ms. Taylor. I apologize. Your time is up. Just to get, once again, I will send you an email with the link so that you can finish your comment on the Andrea Harris Task Force website. And thank you once again for your comment. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on from there, we have Joel Porter.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, I can hear you, and you may start now.
Distinguished members of the task force, my name is Joel Porter. I'm a resident of Durham County and the policy manager of Clean Air Carolina. As you may recall, I spoke at your last session on economic development and the need to transition to a more circular, sustainable economy. Environmental justice is intertwined with that subject. Clean Air Carolina works with a number of EJ communities and advocates. All across our state, low-income communities and communities of color are disproportionately impacted by negative environmental effects caused by industrial, governmental, or commercial operations or policies. There are a number of steps this task force can recommend to help alleviate environmental injustice throughout North Carolina. One of the most impactful solutions is to change the way that new business is recruited to the state through their economic development efforts. The Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of Commerce under Executive Order 80 should already be ensuring that any company that wants to do business in the state fits within the greenhouse gas budget set by the governor's order. Additionally, we must ensure that these communities are being protected by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, not just in theory, but in practice. Title VI requires that entities who receive federal resources, such as state agencies, protect communities that are disproportionately impacted by pollution, water contamination, or other environmental injustices. Intentional planning and zoning at the local and county levels must be improved. This is especially true in rural communities. Better planning and zoning will help ensure equitable, sustainable economic development. In Kittrell, North Carolina, a land clearing and inert debris landfill is proposed on an 83-acre property that is zoned as agricultural residential. This site is surrounded by small residential lots and underdeveloped land with streams, wetlands, and floodplains running through the proposed site. Developing this land into an LCID landfill will not bring jobs or any type of beneficial development to this area. It will ensure the opposite. It will decrease property values. Nobody wants to build a new home next to a landfill. The only type of development a landfill will attract will be more undesirable polluting industries. These kinds of projects just perpetuate a cycle of injustice. As I mentioned,
Mr. Porter, I apologize. Your time is up. Once again, as I said before, we do have the Andre Harris Task Force website. I will send you the link so that you may complete your comment on that website as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
All right. And following up next, we have Jill Howell. Are you on the call?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Give me just one moment and you can start now.
Thanks. My name is Jill Howell. I'm the Pamlico Tar River Keeper with Sound Rivers. We're an environmental advocacy organization that works to protect and monitor the Tar, Pamlico, and Neuse River watersheds. I want to use this time to highlight some of the EJ issues Sound Rivers works on that have been exacerbated by COVID, as well as recommendations to the task force. The first is on climate change. We've seen one of the most active hurricane seasons on record this year and still have 2 months to go. North Carolina can't afford to be investing in anything except clean renewable energy, given our climate vulnerability. Natural gas doesn't count, and neither do biogas or biomass alternatives. We also can't afford to be framing issues in terms of jobs versus the environment. It's a false dichotomy to suggest economic growth relies solely on bringing additional polluting industry and means of energy production to the state. The second is related to CAFOs. Industrialized hog and poultry operations in the best of times present major environmental justice concerns. They're disproportionately located in communities of color and low-income communities. The open pits of hog waste are at risk of breaching from hurricanes and other heavy rain events. And during COVID, a different vulnerability in this broken food system has been highlighted. While certain work has been deemed essential, workers in those jobs appear to be expendable. Processing plants were kept open throughout the pandemic, forcing workers into dangerous conditions where known outbreaks were occurring, yet transparency was near non-existent. Third, I want to highlight that environmental justice is not just about stopping things, but also about creating better, more equitable access to environmental goods. COVID's highlighted the importance of resources such as green space and other outdoor amenities as a way for people to safely leave their homes. And as far as actionable items, the task force could recommend permitting agencies require an EJ assessment for any project with environmental implications. Recent legislation in New Jersey requires a state environmental regulatory agency make determinations and permitting decisions that compare health or environmental stresses of projects impacting designated EJ communities. The same can and should be done by DEQ in North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Howell. And I believe next on the call we have Matt Legerton.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. All right, you may begin now.
Yes, I'm Reverend Mac Ledgerton, co-director of the Robeson County Cooperative for Sustainable Development. I have 3 comments related to COVID-19, data collection, and disaster response. In our Robeson County region, we've had at least 5 COVID-19 outbreaks in food processing centers. 3 are 3 of the largest in the nation. All are in a 25-mile radius of each other. The lack of public disclosure of all pandemic outbreaks, especially those in mostly rural food processing center areas, is the greatest weakness and example of neglect and injustice in our entire state's response to COVID-19. When our pandemic outbreaks aren't treated equally and with equity, our people aren't either. Our people and families need to be fully informed of the risks and impacts of the pandemic in all of our local communities. We owe this to everyone. Please right this wrong. We need a green COVID-19 response, not red and blue ones. Secondly, North Carolina needs to align its state data collection policies and procedures with the federal government by collecting all data on a census tract basis, not just a county and statewide level. Until we do this, we will never, ever be able to document the impact and act of any social and environmental condition or situation on and in low-income communities and communities of color until we do this. Thirdly, with climate disaster, our state needs to engage disaster-impacted residents as full partners at the disaster recovery decision-making table. Our most impacted residents need to be the leaders in revisioning and redeveloping their own communities with the assistance of resource providers. Without their engagement and leadership, residents see little future in their communities. Until we do this, all home buyout programs need to be stopped. What we call voluntary buyout programs most of the time become involuntary sellout programs. Thank you.
Excuse the interruption. Oh, fantastic. All right. Thank you, Mr. Ledgerton, for your comment. And next we have Anita Cunningham.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. Give me just 1 second and you may start now.
Hi, my name is Anita Cunningham, and I'm a staff member with the Robeson County Cooperative for Sustainable Development. The North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality has led local and regional educational sessions on climate disaster across the state. We need North Carolina DEQ to also lead local and regional educational sessions on environmental justice and the principles and practices of a clean and restorative economy. This is particularly needed in our environmental justice communities and counties. While there are meetings and discussions on the state level about developing a clean economy, reducing carbon emissions and mitigating climate change, our rural and poor counties, particularly in eastern North Carolina, are becoming dirtier and dirtier with natural gas, biomass, unregulated and poorly regulated factory farms, biogas and plastics. At the same time, our forests are being cut down at a rapid rate and our wood is being sent overseas for fuel. And counties with high poverty, local officials are so desperate for new industry that will help reduce the tax burden. They will accept and permit almost any business. The state is also quick to provide incentive monies and tax breaks for almost any incoming businesses as well. We don't need to be burning anything to make electricity. However, if it is burned, it should not be called renewable or clean. Our state is moving in the wrong direction, and our environmental justice communities are being overburdened with more and more polluters. Our state government can play a positive role in promoting a clean economy by stopping the expansion, recruitment, and subsidizing of more dirty industries. I implore that you take these comments and please consider them seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. We appreciate your comment. Next, we have Will Harlan. Are you on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Give me just 1 second, and you may start now.
Thank you, Secretary Sanders and Secretary Regan, for organizing this call and listening to all of us. It means a lot. I'm a resident of Asheville, North Carolina, and I work for the Sierra Club. And I think one of the most effective ways to address public and community health, environmental justice, and climate justice is to require environmental justice impact statements. It's a clean, simple, single policy that can save money and lives. As you know, low income and Black and BIPOC communities are unfairly overburdened with pollution and toxic facilities. So if a policy were enacted that required an environmental justice analysis, it would ensure that new energy generation projects do not negatively impact low income and minority communities, and would also alleviate the negative community impacts from existing energy generation facilities. As I mentioned, it's a simple single policy that would have a ripple effect across the state, especially alleviating the toxic burden of low-income communities. So I hope you'll consider elevating an environmental justice impact statement as a priority policy as part of this task force. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan, for your comment. Next, we have Brian Schaffner. Are you on the call?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. All right, give me just 1 second, and you may start now.
Hello, my name is Reverend Schaffner from the Anderson community. Although the NCDQ/DAQ denied an asphalt plant or company air permits from building right here in our backyard, it's a shame that EJ community is being forced to learn Title 4, 5, and 6, as well as Subchapter 01C, in order to enjoy what God created for each and every person, and that is clean air and clean water. It is also a shame how COVID-19 works for those that should be protecting the people, but at the same time, they're allowing the polluting industries to move into the neighborhoods and add to the already suppressed Black and brown community. If there is one thing that should be plastered on everyone's door, is keep environmental injustice in front of you. That would be a sign reading, would you want a polluting industry to polluting industries? Put the people's humanity first, protect them daily, put the processes in place and let them judge for themselves. For the processes that are in place that are old, tweak them to today's society, not yesterday's racism. So the Black and brown people will be able to breathe without having another knee on their neck, without one stressor placed before them. Let them breathe and let them live through the process that protects them. Subchapter 01C, the impact environmental studies, the EIAs, let them stand and be able to judge for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Schaffner, for your comment. I believe next we have Caroline Lauer. Okay. Not hearing her name, I will move on to the next person, and we will call on at the end to see if maybe she is hopped on later. So next we have William Compton.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. This is a subject that's near and dear to our hearts. Thank you for the creation of this government task force. The task force and the government is charged with protecting the lives of our citizens. In our community, it seems to us that over the last 9 months that we've had to fight the government representatives to try to protect our lives in Caswell County. This is not an emotional plea about harms of air pollution and the polluting industries that produce the pollution. These are scientifically based concerns that we have been expressing over the last 9 months about the harms that the different emissions can do to our bodies and the bodies of other people throughout the state that needs to be considered. We feel that the community here in Anderson, which is near where I live on Highway 62 near a proposed site called Burlington North for an asphalt plant. proposed asphalt plant. This is the emissions here is right next to what we feel is a Title VI community, and the surrounding community as well as that community there and at near the site. And I'm sorry for my stampering. I've got a horse. I'm a little bit, but there's a lot of illness in there, and we need to try to address that, and to I think in every place. I sent in a written document, including a study from Harvard University, one from Duke and Breedel, and one from the American Heart Association. I wish you consider that it discusses the concerns over COVID-19 and asphalt plant, suicides near asphalt plant, and the negative effects from pollution from asphalt plants. Again, it's not emotional but factual. However, please note that a rather high number of residents living in very close proximity to the proposed Burlington plant have serious heart disease. My heart conditions, I have atrial fibrillation, irregular heartbeats, high blood pressure, and our other neighbors have similar circumstances. At least you can see the studies that I have sent. None of us, like our citizens, like other citizens in our state, would be expected to survive the effects of toxic pollutants from.
I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Compton. I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Compton. Your time is up. Once again, we do have a link on the Andrea Harris Task Force website, which I will provide to you after this meeting, so that you may continue the rest of your comment on there, and the task force may be able to read it. Thank you once again for your comment.
Thank you very much.
All right. Next, we have Miss Anita Faust. Are you on the call?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you, and you may start your time now.
Please add my comments and attachments to the official public record. Thank you, Governor Cooper, for honoring Andrea Harris's memory and legacy with Executive Order 143. The citizens are depending on each level of the government to be a safety net to protect them from betrayal of local government officials, environmental racism, and other problems that endanger humans, wildlife, and the environment. The Anderson Community Group fought for environmental justice without knowledge of processes and still cannot get answers to our questions about processes from government representatives. We need your help in this battle for environmental justice. Here is a summarized timeline, and supporting documents are attached. Timeline 1. November 2019, citizens found out about the polluting industry and started their fight for environmental justice in Caswell County 2. August 24th, 2020, DA2 denied Carolina Sun Rock LLC the air permit application for Caswell County due to air pollution issue 3. September 8th, 2020, Caswell County Commissioners entertained the recommendation of Attorney Tom Terrell to repeal the Environmental Impact Ordinance 4. September 11th, 2020, Carolina Sun Rock LLC appealed the DAC decision. Please find attached supporting documents 1. Subchapter 01C regarding cumulative impacts to human health 2. Article SELC plans to sue Burlington over PFAS 1. For dioxane pollution in drinking water. Sludge 3. Caswell County Agenda. Item 8. To eliminate the Environmental Impact Ordinance EIO. 4. Memo from Attorney Tom Terrell recommending to eliminate the EIO 5. DAQ's announcement of denial of air permit 6. Petition appeal of denial. Please take this seriously and protect the citizens. Thank you, Anita Faust.
Thank you, Ms. Faust, for your comments. And I did receive your email, so I will share those as well. And next we have Emily Zucchino. Are you on the call?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Give me just one moment and you can start your time now.
Hey, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emily Zucchino, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement for Dogwood Alliance, the leading forest protection organization in the Southern U.S. For the past 6 years, I've worked with community members in Eastern North Carolina to oppose the expansion of the wood pellet industry. I have seen how the lack of a required cumulative impact analysis has worsened environmental injustices in our state. In the case of the biomass industry, NCDEQ has granted every single permit for the industry to construct new facilities and expand existing facilities despite the locating of each of these facilities in environmental justice communities, evidence of the industry being in violation of the Clean Air Act, and scientific research that burning trees for electricity is worse for the climate than burning coal. 4 years ago in Richmond County, we appealed to NCDEQ to consider the cumulative impact of adding another polluting industry in a county that already had several other polluting industries and ranked close to last in health outcomes for the state. More recently, during the coronavirus pandemic, we made the same appeal regarding a proposed wood pellet facility in Robeson County. We have urged DEQ to limit industrial logging along the coastal plain where communities are seeing increased flooding from hurricanes and storms. And we have provided ample evidence that expanding the wood pellet industry in North Carolina is in direct contradiction to Governor Cooper's executive order on climate change. Yet all of the proposed permits were approved, opening the door for an industry that has been linked to harmful pollution that can increase vulnerability to COVID, degraded landscapes, and worsening the climate crisis. I'm hopeful that this subcommittee will advance a strategy to develop legislation that requires a cumulative impact assessment in the permitting process. Included in this analysis should be an industry's impact on the surrounding community, the environment, and how it might impede our state's climate and resiliency goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zucchino, for your comment. I believe next we have Ryan Emmanuel.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and you may begin your time now.
Thanks. 2020 has brought into focus the fact that racially marginalized communities make up an outsized share of Americans affected by COVID-19, subjected to police brutality, exposed to air and water pollution, and more. I'm grateful that the executive order includes a call for environmental justice. I would urge the subcommittee to carefully consider what it means to ensure what EPA describes as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people in environmental decision-making. On its face, that statement is fairly positive, but if we don't scrutinize it carefully, we run the risk of watering down the potency of environmental justice policy. That power, of course, is to actively undo existing patterns of inequity in the distribution of environmental harms. So we now have decades of scientific evidence that marginalized communities, mostly Black and Brown, host a disproportionately large share of polluting infrastructure in the U.S. Yet despite more than 25 years of federal environmental justice policy, that pattern hasn't gone away. Research suggests there are multiple reasons why, and I'll end by sharing two of them. First, we rarely use rigorous metrics and benchmarks to evaluate disproportionate impacts of proposed actions on poor and minority communities. Imagine planning the COVID-19 response without standardized data on infection rates or benchmarks. Yet that's basically where we are when it comes to environmental justice. This subcommittee can recommend policies that incorporate rigorous demographic metrics and benchmarks into decision-making. Second, the participatory nature of environmental justice affirms that an agency or developer can't unilaterally decide how to ensure or restore justice. This subcommittee can recommend policies that define much clearer standards and accountability procedures for interactive participation of marginalized peoples in decision-making. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel, for your comment. I believe next we have Mr. Reich Longest. Okay, not hearing that, I will come back at the end of this to revisit those who haven't been able to speak yet. But next, I believe we have Senator Natalie Murdoch. Are you on the call?
Yes, I'm on.
All right, thank you, Senator Murdoch, and you may speak now.
All right, thank you. I want to thank the, first I want to applaud the intentional efforts of Governor Cooper to create this task force to carry on the tremendous legacy of Andrea Harris. My native state of North Carolina has a long legacy in regards to fighting for environmental justice and equity. I'm concerned about federal efforts to roll back measures that work to protect and mitigate harmful impacts of pollution, poor air quality, and transportation infrastructure may have on communities of color. It is for this reason that the work we complete at the state level is more critical than ever. Climate change will force us to take these recommendations seriously. I fully support the designation of a permanent full-time position on environmental justice, equity, and inclusion in the Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation, Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, and at the Office of Emergency Management. As a state senator, I will work to develop legislative strategy and support the recommendations of this committee, legislation that will support clean air, clean water, clean energy, and a green economy. I also support the creation of a standalone environmental, energy, and natural resource committee and a green bipartisan caucus. We need to revisit funding shortfalls in our Clean Water Management Trust Fund, CCAP program, and other programs that were never fully restored to pre-recession funding levels. I also support providing DEQ with the staffing and funding needed to implement the recommendations that will continue to be set forth by this subcommittee. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to comment on the great work that you all are doing.
Thank you, Senator Murdoch. We appreciate your comment. And I do see now that Mr. Longest is on the call. Mr. Longest, are you good to speak?
Thank you. Thank you to the and thank you for the opportunity to present these views. This is some of the most important work that I think any of us can be engaged in. Over 20 years ago, Governor Jim Hunt's Department of Environment and Natural Resources committed to working on environmental justice and environmental equity. And in successive administrations, including the end of Governor Hunt's administration, the Easley administration, the Perdue administration, were unable to effectuate the promises that were made back in 2000. Governor McCrory actually turned the clock backwards and pulled the state back on environmental justice and environmental equity. Now Governor Cooper has reinvigorated the effort, and I salute him and I salute all of you for your efforts in this regard. But there are major things that are left undone, in particular, the failure to look comprehensively at multimedia, that is, impacts on environmental justice communities from permits from different divisions within DEQ. That is a major problem, as well as the impacts that are cumulative from multiple permitted activities under different sections on a particular community. You can't look at one permit in isolation and expect justice to correct itself. We know from studies, demographic studies, from studies of medical health and outcomes in many EJ communities that there are an entire range of exposures that these communities are facing. Some refer to this as the exposome, that is an entire range of different exposures that are coming on a community. And looking at each permit only through the lens of one media or another and failing to develop a cumulative impact study, failing to look at indicators of environmental health means that we have failed environmental justice communities fundamentally. We have not undertaken our constitutional duty to protect the environment, our water and air resources for all of our citizens. We have great environmental quality for some and not so great for others. Your task force has a critical role to play. I encourage you to work on the cumulative impact aspect of everything that you do. There are many existing authorities under EPA's rules that could be exercised that haven't been.
Excuse the interruption, Mr. Longest. I apologize for the interruption. Your time is up. But once again, if you do have more to say, feel free. I will send out the link for the Andre Harris Task Force public comments on the website. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
And next we have Jefferson Curry II. Are you on the call? Okay, not hearing Mr. Curry. Once again, I will call back again at the end of this call for anyone I may have missed. But next, do we have Tony Burnett?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Give me just one moment. Let me set the timer, and you can start now.
First, I'd like to say good afternoon to the task force. And I'd like to thank Secretary Regan and Secretary Sanders for being on, and also like to thank Governor Roy Cooper for helping to keep North Carolina safe during the COVID environment. I'm the NAACP president here in Northampton County, and we have faced three crises, one being coal ash, which we was able to fight and stop it from getting into our county. The second was the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. We joined that fight as well. And the third is the COVID-19, which we're currently fighting at this point in time. Northampton is a Tier 1 county, majority African-American, and our average age of our citizens are 65 years old, and majority of those citizens are living on a fixed income. my comments is to this, to the task force is making sure that we stay vigilant, because all of the fights that we've been in so far is not over. And I'm asking you all to stay engaged with all the environmental polluters that's out there, and going to continue to try to get into counties like the one that I live in. So that is my comment, and I'd like to thank you all for listening. And you all have a good day.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Curry. I believe, sorry, no, that was Mr. Burnett. I apologize. I believe next on the call we have David Salazar. I can hear you, and if you are ready to speak, you may speak now.
Okay, this is David Salazar. Thank you for inviting me. This is David Salazar with CLA Licencias, grassroots here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And on the short term, this is a very good point to have someone on this position, but someone that can fill this position with a bilingual and also they can connect with our growing Latino community, since we've never been part of this. And I really thank you for all this. On the second short-term goal, this is also a good thing, but we also need to consider our farm workers who often have inaccurate housing and work with dangerous chemicals like pesticides and fertilizers, and no one really talks about this within our community, and we don't have anybody from the state that comes and talks to us on our language, on our, culture. On the third, I have this right down, so bear with me. Thank you. On the long term, need to also look into the environmental injustice that occur with our farm workers. They work under pressure with chemicals that oftentimes are not even explained to them on their own language. We need someone who is excellent in community engagement and can really connect with the community. And a good example of this is Cynthia Castillo, which I believe will be speaking next from me. So that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Salazar, for your comments. All right, next we have Will Hendrick. Will Hendrick, are you able to speak?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. Give me just 1 second and you can start now.
Good evening. My name is Will Hendrick, and I'm a resident of Chatham County and an attorney with Waterkeeper Alliance. I'm pleased that this subcommittee has expressed interest in legislative changes to adequately address environmental justice concerns, but believe there are steps that can be taken now, which do not require action by elected officials and may benefit future advocacy in the General Assembly. For example, there is no question that current state law requires, and has since 2007, consideration of Title VI non-discrimination obligations in the context of landfill permitting by DEQ. But DEQ just proposed rules about landfill permitting, which the EMC agreed to advance, that not only omit any mention of environmental justice or Title VI, but also lack any clarity regarding how the agency implements its long-held legal obligations. There is no explanation of the process by which the agency, for instance, defines the relevant community, assesses cumulative impacts, evaluates the proportionality of any adverse impacts, or otherwise ensures compliance with the law before issuing, conditioning, or denying a permit. Consistent implementation of legal authority is important and will remain so if and when legal authority is acknowledged or enacted to address environmental justice concerns in other contexts. I hope this subcommittee will work with DEQ to clarify how that agency implements authority it has exercised for the last 13 years. This clarity would, in turn, help to inform elected officials who may wonder what, specifically, will happen if and when similar statutory language is adopted to ensure non-discrimination in other contexts. I look forward to pressing the legislature to empower agencies to do more, but first I implore agencies to commit to and be clear about doing everything they can to ensure environmental justice under the current law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrick, for your comment. And next we have Cynthia Castillo. Are you on the call? Okay, not hearing her name. Next we have Wendy Moore.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you. You are a little bit quiet though, so if you could speak up a little bit before giving your comment, that would help everyone be able to hear you, but you may start your time now.
My name is Wendy Moore, and I am chairperson of the Lumbee Tribal Council, Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I wish to speak regarding tribal consultation. To the state of North Carolina, tribal governments need and wish to be given full and meaningful consultation when proposed projects pose magnitudinal impacts on tribal communities. I encourage all tribal governments to develop legislative language regarding tribal engagement. Though big business may have rights to the land, they in no way own the history. My tribal community has been historically decimated by the big construction that Piedmont Natural Gas is engaged in my tribal community, and I implore and respectfully request the Lumbee tribal seat at the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore, for your comment. I believe that is everyone that we have on the list. Is there anyone who I missed earlier or who wasn't able to speak earlier that can speak now? Okay, so hearing none, I am going to ask Secretary Regan, do you have any closing remarks to give?
I don't. I want to thank everyone. We really appreciate folks taking the time out, and just want to say thank you, and the comments will be taken into consideration as we formulate our next steps.
Thank you, Secretary Regan. Secretary Sanders, do you have any closing remarks to give?
Yes, I echo Secretary Regan's gratitude for your participation and comments today. I'd also like to remind you that the Department of Administration has a public comment form on our web page. We invite you to provide feedback there, and you can log on, finish your comments, or add additional comments. And additionally, all of our task force meetings are public meetings, and those dates are available on the web page as well. The next task force meeting is October 7th at 10 a.m. We welcome you all to attend. And again, thank you for your time this afternoon. Before we close, I'd also like to remind all of you to complete your 2020 census. Hopefully, as you know, the census is critically important to every resident of this state and the nation, and is a way of ensuring that we get our fair share of tax dollars that have already been paid at the federal and state level. The census data collection will be used to distribute federal funds to North Carolina and other states, as well as North Carolina is also doing an additional apportionment of a seat in Congress in D.C. And I think we all would appreciate an additional North Carolinian to speak on our behalf in Washington, D.C. The funds are used for services, local schools or throughout our communities, as well as planning. And at a time like this, when we're faced with the pandemic, I'm sure you all can see where we would benefit from the use of those funds in our healthcare systems and across our communities. Right now, about 30% of the households in North Carolina have not been counted, which results in about $5.4 billion at risk of being lost to our state. So we're talking real dollars, real impact, real lives who will be impacted by either our full and a complete count or the lack thereof. Unfortunately, there has been quite a bit of, I guess, confusion and noise about the date. Initially, in the midst of COVID-19, we were told that the census would continue to count through October 31st. Last week, the U.S. District Court in California ordered that the 2020 census data would continue through October 31st. Prior to that, the administration, the Trump administration, wanted to end that at the end of September. Today, I believe the latest I heard is that the Secretary of Commerce in the Trump administration has said that the count will end on October 5th. So there's still a lot of legal wheels turning, and we really can't control what that date is as that plays out. But the one thing that you can control is your participation in the census. So we will continue in North Carolina. The North Carolina Complete Count will continue to raise awareness, remind everyone to complete your census. Self-response is critically important, and I couldn't leave the meeting without asking each of you, if you have not done so, please get off this call. Take the 10 minutes. It's safe. You can do it at home. You can do it on your mobile phone or on your computer, or you can call in and perform it. It only takes about 10 minutes to shape our futures as well as your family and neighbors' futures for the next 10 years and beyond. And so with that, thank you again, and thanks in advance for completing your census, and please tell others to do so too. Catherine, thank you and the team for your time, and to the Andrea Harris Task Force members and Secretary Regan, as always, I appreciate your partnership and your leadership on this work. Thank you, and everyone have a safe and good afternoon.